2024 was the year I developed a real appreciation for what the Pure Drive has to offer. The problem is Babolat always waits like 150,000 years to release a new frame, so I wasn't able to talk about it that much. But now the brand new 2025 Babolat Pure Drive is here. Hey everybody, it's Luca from Rackets and Runners. Now you're probably all thinking, Luca, we all already know how good the Pure Drive is. What are you talking about? Well, yes, I'm finally on board and I'm going to try and explain exactly how special this racket is. I've always preferred more classic rackets, as you can see with my love for the Gravity Pro, but there's a magical element to this frame that a lot of other brands have tried to capture with their power rackets, but they never seem to nail quite as well as Babolat. All right, well, I just got hit by a squall. It started raining. Welcome to Hawaii, everybody. So if the camera angle is different, I just had to take everything down and reset it up. But anyways, I did just quickly want to talk about this paint job because I think it's another one like the E-Zone that's not going to be for everybody, but honestly, it is growing on me. You got a cool little retro theme going on here by the Drive logo, and then this color, I believe, is either called Stone Blue or Steel Blue. After I called the E-Zone Periwinkle, somebody mentioned that I should start giving the proper color names, so I'll try to do that on new rackets from now on. So yeah, I actually think it's a pretty nice paint job update, and of course we are going to go over all the other stuff that has changed here in a second. But before we get into any of that, let me remind you that any of the rackets we talk about on this channel you can check out on our website, racketsandrunners.ca. Also, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, follow me in the store on Instagram, and let me know in the comment section what you want me to cover next. All right, so in terms of updates, to be honest, there isn't a ton to talk about. I'll start with the technological update. There's a new dampening material in here called NF2 Tech 2.0, and it replaces SWX Pure Feel. So the Pure Drive line actually skips NF2 1.0, which is one of those stabilization dampening technologies that I've always been a very big fan of on the Aero 98 and the Aero 100. NF2 uses flax fibers to enhance mechanical strength in the direction of the fibers, and optimally filter vibrations to allow good feedback while eliminating discomfort. Long story short, we hear this from every company nowadays. This is another one of those dampening materials that's meant to keep the frame nice and sturdy on impact and also a little bit more comfortable. As far as what has changed coming from NF2 1.0, honestly, I have no idea. They've been very vague about it, no real mention of improvements, so maybe just a more refined version. What's cool is that 75% of flax production happens in France, so it's kind of nice to see these brands working with materials their countries specialize in. You got Yonex with the Minimushi bagworms, Babolat with the flax. Who knows, maybe auxetic is native to Austria. I just checked, and apparently the term auxetic is of Greek origin, coined by a professor in England, and first artificially developed by a German researcher. So no, not Austrian at all. How unfortunate. Anyways, the rest of the tech is pretty much the same. You've got the elliptical frame design, which just refers to the rounder profile of the beam in the throat here, which I think is actually a pretty big part of why this racket is so powerful. Then you have the FSI power grommets. These have been around forever, and Babolat claims that they help to amplify power, and yeah, this racket is very powerful, so I have no reason to doubt that. Then you've got the HITR or HTR system, which stands for high torsional rigidity. Babolat claims that this system is there to help with impact stability and energy return. The term system is about as vague as it gets, but again, powerful racket, so I'm sure it works. Now let's go over the specs. It's still got the same 16x19 string pattern, 100 square inch head size. It still weighs 300 grams and has the same variable beam that starts off at 23 millimeters up here, then goes up to 26 and then back to 23 in the throat. Flex is where things get a little more interesting. Now keep in mind, Babolat does allow for plus or minus 3 points in their quality control, but here's what I know. In the marketing material that they sent over, they claimed flex to be 72 RA unstrung. Now I did want to check that, so I tested 3 rackets, this demo and a couple new ones. This one's strung flexed at 69, one of the new ones unstrung flexed at 71, and the other also unstrung was 69. Usually flex goes down by 2 when you string a racket, so from the ones I tested, I'm going to go 71, 71, and 69 unstrung. I did test a couple of the old Pure Drives just to get a baseline in case our machine is off. Brand new, unstrung, I got 72 and 73. So I can't say exactly what the target flex is supposed to be, unless it's that 72 RA that they claimed in the marketing. But what I will say is that I do think they actively chose to lower it a little bit by 1 or 2 points or something like that. That's probably a good thing. It's still a very stiff racket, but obviously Pure Drives are notoriously a little bit uncomfortable, so lowering the flex is just gonna help with that. Then you've got the swing weight, which is also pretty similar to the previous Pure Drive. I tested this one at 317 strung and the other two at 283 and 286 unstrung, which comes out to about 310 and 313 strung. The previous Pure Drive was always swinging around that high 310s, low 320s, so I do think they lowered it a little bit, but again, it's really hard to tell you what the actual target swing weight is supposed to be. That's about it for the specs and technology. It's pretty obvious that they wanted to go for a subtle update this time around, which is totally fine. The previous Pure Drive was still the best-selling racket, even 4 years into its cycle, so really no reason to drastically change it up. But now let's talk about feel. I'm really excited to talk about feel here because it's a frame design that's been around for so long that it kind of has its own classic feel, but when it was first developed 30 years ago, it was anything but classic compared to the frames of that era. The Pure Drive has this stiff, high-energy return feel to it. The ball spends very little time in the string bed, and it feels like it's engineered to add power beyond the racket just being stiff. The throat itself stays super firm on impact, which is usually an area that's a little bit more flexible, but here you really feel that sturdiness, which helps to punch through the ball a little bit more. It creates this unique pop and also a slightly deeper boom sound when the ball leaves the string bed. It's quite a cool sensation that becomes very addictive because you know when you get that pop that you're going to be rewarded with a high quality shot. That unique Pure Drive feel is what a lot of other brands are trying to copy, but they just can't seem to nail in the exact same way. A lot of power rackets actually feel quite jarring even when you do make good contact. Very few have this rewarding element to them. Now, one of the main issues players have had with the Pure Drive is discomfort, because even if the racket feels nice on impact, if you don't dampen it, 72 RA is eventually going to take its toll, especially if you have a history with discomfort. 10 or 15 years ago, Babolat started to really dampen their Pure Drives to make them more comfortable, but they went a little bit over the top with that dampening, which sort of muted out that magical response. Over time, though, they were able to develop better dampening technology, which didn't mute the feel quite as much, and the previous Pure Drive was pretty much the pinnacle of them blending that comfort and feel. That was part of the reason why I liked it so much and why it was such a successful frame for them, and the good news is that is still very much the case on this new one. The only difference in feel is that it's ever so slightly more dampened, but even that is super minimal. If anything, it is more comfortable, but still feels just as good. So for me, it's a win-win, and I think that's thanks to this NF2 tech, because I also felt they struck a really good balance of comfort and feel on the Aero line. I also just quickly wanted to address something here, because dampening does mute feel a little bit. That's par for the course, but on a stiff racket like this, as long as it's not overly dampened, it doesn't create a disconnected feel like what I've talked about on some softer dampened rackets. The ball spends less time in the string bed on stiffer rackets, so even if they do have some modern dampening tech, they're still very responsive. With soft dampened rackets, the long dwell time and muted feel make it so that you do get a little bit lost in there. I'll probably talk about this a little bit more with the Clash review, but there's nothing mushy or ambiguous with the Pure Drive. Of course, it's not a classic connection to the ball, but you still feel the ball in the strings and there's plenty of feedback. Now, in terms of the actual change in stiffness, this doesn't feel that much softer than the previous one. It's still a stiff racket, but it is quite comfortable considering its flex, so if the previous one worked for you, this one definitely will. It is just a little bit more comfortable in general. I wouldn't confidently tell you to go for it if you've never used a Pure Drive, but if you want to try it, by all means. Now let's talk about how this unique Pure Drive feel translates to playability in terms of power, spin, and control. The Pure Drive is a true power racket. That was the selling point when it first came out, and it has pretty much stayed the gold standard for power throughout those 30 years, and that is definitely still the case here. This racket is extremely powerful, and that applies to both ways we define power in tennis: easy access to depth and high pace generating potential. Let's start with easy depth, because that's what makes a racket forgiving and easy to use. On the Pure Drive, you have that high stiffness, the thick beam, and the frame design, which gives it that big, powerful sweet spot. That makes the racket super forgiving, even for those of you who haven't yet developed a fast and full stroke. It pushes the ball deep with very little effort, and if you do make poor contact, more often than not, the racket will help you out. The thing is, that unique, rewarding feel that I mentioned earlier is still there, even at that slower pace. That's part of the beauty of the Pure Drive, is that its benefits aren't exclusive to advanced players, which is why it's such a good racket to learn with. You can use that rewarding feel to dial in your stroke, but of course that sensation certainly isn't limited to slower strokes. The better you get, the faster you accelerate that racket face through contact, the more rewarding it becomes. So it's great at a low level, but then also has quite a high ceiling, especially with its high pace generating potential. The top end power you can generate when you're swinging big is off the charts. It absolutely destroys the ball, and that's thanks to the unique design and technology within the frame. It's quite a magical sensation when you're hitting big here. It's not necessarily a pure feel and classic plow through with high stability and weight weight behind the ball, but it does feel like there's something about the racket giving you a little extra. What's really cool is that it achieves that high power without the weight needed for stability and plow through, which means that high pace is easy to generate, unlike something like the Gravity Pro, which I said last week has tons of plow through, but it's also heavy and quite sluggish. Because it's so easy to generate power, that also means it doesn't require you to have the most perfect technique, timing, and footwork to create those powerful shots. Take this as an example. I've had a really tough time with backhands recently because my right ankle's injured, so I can't really step into the shot with full body rotation and proper technique. I'm not saying I was hitting the perfect backhand here, but I was still able to get decent pace off of it, and that's thanks to this racket's easy access to high power. Really, this power profile is why so many different players like it so much. It's forgiving and powerful, but it's also rewarding and powerful. Sometimes forgiving, powerful rackets feel like they have a cap to their playability. The Pure Drive doesn't. It has a really low bar, but also a super high ceiling. It's very cool, but the one thing I will say is that it's not for everyone, because you do feel like the frame is doing a lot of the work for you. And for those of you who like generating everything yourself, this might feel like you're losing a bit of control. The Pure Drive is not a classic control racket in the sense that it pushes the ball deep, it adds a bit of power to your shot, so like I just said, you're not the one in control of everything. It also has a very instantaneous launch. What I mean by that is because it's so stiff and thick, the ball spends very little time in the string bed, so you don't have that dwell time to kind of suck it in for control. This isn't the type of racket where if you're not feeling it, you can slow down, use the frame's flex to guide the ball and readjust. You really got to commit to your shots and hit through the ball. You can hit with margin, which we'll talk about with spin, but when a racket is this powerful, if you put too much power or hit the wrong angle, it can overpower the ball and push it out. Classic control rackets, like the Gravity Pro I just reviewed, they don't have a lot of easy depth, so you can whack at the ball, even miss-hit it, and it will probably stay in. That's the trade-off with power rackets. Power comes at the expense of soft, classic control, and this is why a lot of advanced players who have really fast, full strokes prefer control rackets, because it allows them to hit out with more confidence. The thing about the Pure Drive is that it may not have that classic control, but I always feel like I'm in control when I play with it, and that's because it's a very consistent racket. Yes, it pushes the ball deep, but it never surprises you with a random launch, which is not always the case with these powerful, user-friendly frames. Power comes from stiffness, a big open sweet spot, and a trampoline effect, and those things are basically the #1 reason that a racket becomes launchy, which is pretty much a synonym for inconsistency. The Pure Drive is the opposite of launchy. Like I just said, it's super consistent. That doesn't mean the ball's always going to go in, but you're going to know when it's not going in. It's never going to surprise you. Surprises are great when it's a surprise birthday party, but you never want to be surprised by your racket. So on the Pure Drive, control isn't high in the traditional sense, but this consistency means that you have a lot of confidence in your frame. For me, that's the most important thing in a racket. If you can hit every shot you want with confidence, then all the other stuff, power, spin, control, feel, they're not actually that important. This is also a huge part of the reason why there are a lot of advanced players who still like the Pure Drive. Combining this much power with consistency, I don't want to say it's exclusive to the Pure Drive, but there are not that many rackets like this. The E-Zone 100 is the other one that comes to mind. I haven't actually tried the new one, but I can't wait because this comparison is going to be awesome. They are two of my favorite 100s right now. But anyways, what I want everyone to take away here in terms of control is that the Pure Drive certainly doesn't provide you with a classic control experience, but it's so consistent that you do feel like you're in control as long as you're okay with a racket that adds some power. Traditional control will make some players very happy. Consistency will make all players happy. Hopefully that makes sense. Now obviously, when a racket produces a ton of power like this, you have to keep the ball in somehow. Saying it's consistent is all good and well, but if you're consistently launching the ball out, well, that's not really helping anyone. To get the most out of a Pure Drive, at least once you reach a certain level and you have a fast and full stroke, you need to play with spin because that's how you'll control the ball. The good news is it's very spin friendly. It has every ingredient to be good in the spin game. A 16x19 string pattern, a stiff flex, it's light so it has a pretty quick swing speed. All of these characteristics you'd find on spin rackets, but this isn't the type of racket that amplifies spin. That's a sensation you do get on dedicated spin rackets. The V-core is very open in the sweet spot and has tons of snapback. The Arrow is obviously extremely whippy because of its design, and the Extreme is kind of a combination of the two. On the Pure Drive, there's really nothing going on technologically that's going to give you more spin beyond its inherently spin-friendly design. Now you might be thinking, why don't they add some spin elements? The more spin, the better, right? Well, a lot of those design elements that amplify spin also make those rackets launchier and less consistent. On those, you can generate so much spin that you can control the launchiness that way, but that also means that they require you to play with spin. The Pure Drive's consistency allows you to play with much more variety than a lot of these other stiff, dedicated spin rackets. If you're the type of player who loves grinding spin behind the baseline, you may want to go for something else, but for 95% of players, the Pure Drive has more than enough spin, and adding more would take away from its other positive characteristics. Now, compared to the previous one, I didn't really notice an increase or decrease in spin potential. The only thing I'll say is that because they've lowered the swing weight, it does feel a little quicker to bring through contact, which is generally beneficial for spin. The Pure Drive is the type of racket that can work for so many different types of players. I really want to emphasize that the magic here is that it's easy to use, it's super consistent, and it has a very unique, rewarding element to it. That combination is extremely rare and makes it accessible to pretty much any level of player from beginner to professional. It's super well-rounded, and it does allow you to play with quite a bit of variety, but I do think there are a few types of players it works best for. One, new players who are ready to move into this 300-gram weight and want probably the most forgiving racket that also has a super high playability ceiling. Two, those of you who play a modern baseline style and like to go for big shots and want a frame that helps you add that little bit of power. Three, if you are the type of player who thinks they like a specific type of racket, especially control or spin rackets, but you feel like you're stagnating a little bit, this is the exact type of racket that you should pick up to try and redevelop your game. I was personally stagnating a little bit recently, playing pretty much exclusively with 315 plus gram control rackets, and I still like those very much, but I've been playing a lot with the previous Pure Drive over the last 6 months, and I think it's really helped me improve my game, especially because it's so light but still so sturdy at that weight. I can play it in stock form and swing it really quickly without feeling like I'm straining to bring it through contact. Now, it's definitely not going to work for everyone, and if it doesn't work for you, you probably already know that. If you crave that classic feel and control that you get on a racket like the Prestige, well, this is definitely not that. Also, if you do suffer from discomfort, it's definitely still not a racket I would recommend. It's probably the most comfortable Pure Drive ever, but that's also not saying that much. Other than that, though, there's a reason this is the most popular racket on the market, and it's probably going to stay that way for a very long time. That's the magic of the Pure Drive. It's not made for everyone, but it is made for a heck of a lot of people. The update is subtle for sure. Think easier in general, especially easier on the arm, but that's about it. With that said, that is going to be the end of this review. Thank you so much for watching. Happy New Year, everybody. And remember that if you do want to demo the Pure Drive or any other racket, you can come visit us in store, or you can check it out online at racketsandrunners.ca.